Thanks for staying with us here on CBS News. I'm Errol Barnett.
And I'm Elaine Quijano. We are following breaking news.
Yeah, thanks for staying with us as we continue to gather more information about what just took place in Florida. A federal judge there ordering the Justice Department to offer redactions to the affidavit supporting the search warrant executed at Mar-a-Lago. This judge, Judge Reinhart, will then decide what part of those documents can be released to the public.
Now, government officials have 1 week to submit their proposed redactions. Companies, including CBS, sought the release of the affidavit at a hearing today in Florida. The U.S. Justice Department objected.
This comes after FBI agents searched former President Trump's Florida estate last week. They retrieved 11 boxes of materials. We have team coverage of the decision.
Right now, let's bring in by phone our CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter, Nicole Sganga, who was inside covering the hearing. Nicole, you were there. Give us the very latest on what you heard from the judge today.
Elaine, Errol, good to be with you. You heard it there. Judge Reinhart has ordered the government to move forward with proposing redactions to the probable cause affidavit connected to, of course, the FBI's authorized search of former President Donald Trump's home. Now, those redactions, they might be full, they might be partial to the court, but they are due in 1 week. That's next Thursday at 12 p.m. And at that point, Judge Reinhart says that he will review those redactions accordingly. He might agree with the government and we might be done. He might not agree, and this might be a back and forth. What we do know is that at this point, the judge says he's not prepared to find that the affidavit should be fully sealed, meaning he's not ready to say, keep this document under wraps. He seemed very open during today's proceedings to line-by-line redactions. And so we could see this process play out over the course of the next few weeks. But it's very clear here that this is, at least for now, a partial win for the more than a dozen media organizations, including CBS News, who were represented by counsel today in court.
And Nicole, I know you're just outside the courtroom. Any reaction from either side as of yet, as far as you've been able to gather?
Well, we just heard from one of the lawyers, a lawyer representing the Wall Street Journal. You heard it there. Obviously very pleased, at least initially, with the judge's decision to move forward in ordering some redactions to be proposed. You know, I will say that one of the things the judge pointed out is that there was not a lot of disagreement between the parties over the law. There was a lot of common ground, believe it or not, within this courtroom. What was sort of up for debate is, okay, how do the facts apply to the law? And so there was sort of a little bit of back and forth there. Now, I do want to point out, for those of us who were also listening, for any indications, any new details regarding facts around this ongoing investigation. Jay Bratt, who was the attorney representing the government, he is a top national security official at the Department of Justice, acknowledged now not only that there is a heightened public interest in this case, but that this investigation is in its very early stages. He said, quote, "This investigation is open. It is in its early stages. We are still less than 2 weeks away from when the court signed the search warrant." Both parties agreeing here that this is a very unique situation, but an interesting clue from Bratt here regarding the ongoing probe into these potentially classified documents that were retrieved from the former president's home. And part of the reason why this is such a unique case of even potentially partially unsealing this probable cause affidavit is because we are so early in this investigation.
That's our Nicole Skanga outside the courthouse, our Homeland Security and Justice reporter. She was in the room as the judge decided that he is open to a partial redaction of the affidavit that led to the investigation into former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. We have Catherine Herridge, our investigative correspondent, Scott MacFarlane, our congressional correspondent, standing by in Washington, as well as Jessica Levinson, our legal contributor, to help digest what this means.
Yeah, so Catherine, let me ask you, based on what we are learning here, is there an indication of what might actually be in the affidavit based on what we heard come out of this hearing?
I think one of the other big headlines, Elaine and Errol, came from the lips of this top counterintelligence representative from the Justice Department, Jay Bratt with the National Security Division, who said that the probable cause affidavit indicated a violation of one of the obstruction statutes and that investigators believed evidence would be found at Mar-a-Lago to back up those claims. So we now know that at least one of the 3 criminal statutes that's being investigated in this case, the alleged mishandling of classified information or national defense information, obstruction, destruction of records, they thought there was evidence of obstruction at Mar-a-Lago, and that gives us a sense of why they felt they had to act with such immediacy, right? I mean, that's been one of the central questions here. And the judge has full visibility into these records, and he knows the answer to some of that, yet he has decided today that he thinks that there's an overwhelming public interest in having the fullest degree of transparency about that evidence and what precipitated this search.
Scott, let's get your view on this detail, because what we know by now is that you have this potential obstruction of justice charge. We know the government is saying national security is at risk. So what does this tell us about what the eventual and ultimate charges may be that this could lead to?
We get some indication from the Justice Department attorney in court in Florida this afternoon, who said this investigation is in its early stages. That was one of the arguments the Justice Department put forward to keep the affidavit fully sealed. In their court filings earlier in the week, they said releasing an unsealed version of this affidavit would have, quote, devastating consequences on the reputations and individuals who may be identified in the affidavit. So they're making it pretty unequivocal. There's an investigation underway. It's in its early stages. But here's the thing about this fight over the affidavit. Redacting federal documents is a tricky art. It is not so much science as it is art. Redactions, often from the federal government, are overreaching or a black page instead of a white page. They will block out an awful lot more than perhaps the requester is seeking. But then if you black out too much, if you redact too much, do you make the document therefore misleading or unintelligible? That's a problem. So the government has a week to recommend redactions, then the judge gets to review them. And one thing I'd press Jessica on is this is a magistrate judge here at the federal court in Florida. Oftentimes, if a party is not satisfied with what a magistrate judge does, they'll go over the magistrate judge's head to a full district court judge or potentially to a court of appeals. Don't rule out the possibility the Department of Justice can stretch out the clock here, asking for stays, asking for delays, perhaps having appeals. It may not be August 25th that we get a firm answer or a firm update on this.
Jessica, let me ask you a couple questions. First of all, do these media organizations have any input with respect to what actually is going to be redacted and what is not? And also, I'm wondering if you can sort of translate for us. We understand that the judge is ordering certain documents unsealed, the sealing order, motion to seal, and the criminal cover sheet with redactions. What exactly are those documents? What kind of information is contained there?
And if I could pick up on Scott's point, I think he's exactly right. And I said we'll know more next week, and we will know more next week, but it may be that the fight continues, because what we have here is a magistrate judge saying, come back to me with a document that was redacted and then prove up the redactions. As Catherine said, prove up the redactions as to give me specific reasons for every single redaction here. Now, to your question about will the media organizations have some input, I think the answer is no at this point. This is really going to be something that happens between the Department of Justice and the magistrate judge, where they come forward again with the supporting documents and they say, this is why we had to black out this particular information. Let's remember, the judge has seen all of this before. The judge knows what's being crossed out. And to Scott's point, what we also know is that redactions can be, at times, either you're providing people with no information or you're providing people potentially with misleading information. So there's a really significant balance that needs to come here. Now, the media organizations obviously have a say to the extent that they're pushing for information, and they're pushing the Department of Justice, broadly speaking, really to prove this up. Now, to the rest of your question in terms of what are these documents, I mean, we're looking at documents not just Well, I'll say broadly, what do these documents contain? They contain information we think from confidential informants. They contain, the Department of Justice has told us, a roadmap to where the investigation is. They tell us that the investigation not just is at the beginning, but what they expect to do later on, why they think that the obstruction of justice statute was in fact violated. That's the kind of information where instead of us kind of trying to piece together from reporting, well, there was a subpoena, the Trump attorney said that all of the information was turned over, but then it looks like the law enforcement officer said, no, it's not. It would provide a step-by-step with all of that information. And that's why media organizations want it, and that's part of the reason why the Department of Justice doesn't want to give it.
It's so remarkable because what we're all talking about now, to Scott's earlier point, is the art of redactions.
Right.
Right? And if the judge is saying you have to justify each and every one, let me bring in Catherine on this because she's well versed in handling classified documents and sensitive material. As the Department of Justice now has to justify each redaction, how common is that? And what points will DOJ need to make in order to have these redactions stick?
Well, to answer your first question, it is pretty uncommon, but everything is uncommon about this case. You know, asking the Justice Department to justify, as Jessica said, line by line, what they think should remain secret or blacked out on the document if it does eventually become public. I don't say this to take anything away from the judge, but here in Washington, you have a federal bench filled with justices who are really fluent in the language of national security, national defense information, classified information, the surveillance court, the FISA court. So they have a dexterity with these issues. Just looking to this judge's bio on his official webpage with the court, his expertise is really with white-collar crime and civil litigation. So he wouldn't have that same depth and breadth of experience that, let's say, a judge up here in Washington would have, understanding the redactions and some of the levels of classification and sensitivity. So to answer your question, you know, we've never been here before. And the Justice Department, in probably one of the most high-wire cases that they will handle in this administration, now has to go to a court and justify the redactions or the blacking out of information with a judge who has said that such is the public interest, and the arguments from media companies so persuasive that there really is this higher threshold for transparency with the search of a former president, that he doesn't see a scenario where he keeps all of these records under seal or secret and away from public access.
Scott, I'm wondering, I'm not sure if this is a question for you or for Jessica, but what about any individuals, Scott, that might be named in this affidavit? Do we have any indications? Could they be potential, targets, witnesses? Do we have a sense based on what we've heard from this hearing?
One would think the Department of Justice would have the easiest time justifying the redaction of names of individuals in this affidavit. They've already said revealing names of parties or indications of who the parties are that are part of this case would have devastating consequences for those people in addition to their case. But also, this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is happening at a moment where online chat groups and some social platforms are being used by extremists to deduce who the agents might have been who were on the ground at Mar-a-Lago that day doing the search. This is happening in a world in which this judge has received threats or doxing attempts from people unhappy about the search at Mar-a-Lago. Keeping the identities of anybody who's an informant or a part of this case confidential is of the utmost importance, not just to the Department of Justice and its case, but to those people, their well-being, their safety during this politically toxic moment and this uniquely politically dangerous moment.
A politically charged moment indeed. All right, all eyes on August 25th, next Thursday, when those proposed redactions are due. Nicole Skanga, Catherine Herridge, Scott MacFarlane, and Jessica Levinson, thank you all very much for your reporting and insight. Thank you.